Right now, $19.5 million meant for Victorian fire victims is sitting in state government accounts, and Jacinta Allan's government is holding it hostage. Not delayed, not tied up in red tape, held, while families who lost everything in the Grampians fires are still waiting for relief. The Victorian Premier is playing politics with disaster recovery funds, and Anthony Albanese is absolutely livid. This is not about bureaucratic delays or processing times. This is about a state government that took federal money earmarked for people in crisis and has refused to distribute it properly. And if you think this is just another political spat, you are missing the bigger picture entirely, because what is happening in Victoria right now is a masterclass in how disaster recovery funding can be weaponised, mismanaged and turned into a political bargaining chip while ordinary Australians are left in the wreckage. If you are tired of watching governments announce big support packages that never seem to reach the people who need them, if you want to understand how disaster funding actually works and why it keeps failing, then hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel exists to cut through the spin, hold every level of government accountable, and explain what economic decisions actually mean for everyday Australians. No political loyalty, no corporate messaging, just independent analysis that follows the money and asks the questions no one else is asking. Here is what actually happened. The federal government announced a joint fire recovery support package with Victoria. Albanese stood up, made the announcement, promised that Canberra and Melbourne would work together to get money into the hands of affected families. The Commonwealth put up its share, the state was supposed to match it, and then nothing. Weeks go by, families are living in caravans, staying with relatives, sleeping in emergency accommodation. The bills are piling up, insurance claims are dragging, and the Victorian government is sitting on nearly $20 million that was supposed to be flowing through community recovery programs, emergency grants and rebuilding support. When Albanese finally called it out, the response from Allan's office was not an explanation, it was deflection. Blame the feds for not moving fast enough, blame the complexity of joint funding arrangements, blame anything except the decision to hold on to money that was never meant to sit in a state budget line gathering dust. This is where the pressure really starts, because disaster recovery funding in Australia is built on a federal-state cost-sharing model. When a natural disaster is declared, the Commonwealth activates the disaster recovery funding arrangements. That is the formal system. The federal government covers a percentage of eligible costs, the state government covers the rest. In theory, it is supposed to be seamless. Canberra releases its contribution, the state matches it, local councils and emergency services distribute the funds. In practice, it is a bureaucratic nightmare, and it gets worse every single time a state government decides to play hardball over political credit. Victorian families do not care whether the money comes from Canberra or Spring Street. They care whether it arrives, and right now it has not. What makes this even more infuriating is that Albanese has been bending over backwards to keep disaster funding flowing across the country. Floods in Queensland, fires in New South Wales, cyclones in the north. Every time the federal government has stumped up the money fast, sometimes even before the state has formally requested it, because the political cost of being seen to delay disaster relief is enormous. But Jacinta Allan's government has decided that holding on to federal funds is worth the backlash, because in her calculation, the blame will land on Albanese, not on her. And that calculation might have worked if the Prime Minister had not gone public and called it out directly. Now it's a fight, and in a fight over who's more committed to helping fire victims, the side holding the money always loses.
This is the part most people are not being told.
The $19.5 million is not the only money in question. It is just the most visible chunk, because disaster recovery funding does not flow in one lump sum. It comes in waves: immediate relief, emergency accommodation, clean-up grants, rebuilding assistance, mental health support, infrastructure repair. Some of that money is federal, some is state, some is co-funded. And if the state government drags its feet on one part of the package, it creates a bottleneck that delays everything else. Families waiting for a rebuilding grant cannot move forward until the emergency phase is officially closed. Councils cannot start infrastructure repairs until the state confirms its funding commitment. Businesses cannot access recovery loans until both levels of government have signed off on the eligibility criteria. So when Victoria sits on nearly $20 million, it is not just delaying one payment, it is jamming the entire recovery pipeline. And here is where it gets even uglier, because while all of this is playing out, the Allan government is still running ads about how much it cares about regional Victoria, still making announcements about new infrastructure projects, still funding campaigns that spruik its commitment to community safety. The optics are catastrophic. You cannot claim to be the government that has regional communities' backs while you are sitting on disaster recovery funds that were supposed to be in their bank accounts weeks ago, and yet that is exactly what is happening. The political calculus here is not complicated. Allan's government is underwater in the polls. Regional Victoria is furious over cost of living pressures, hospital closures, and infrastructure neglect. So the strategy is to drag out federal funding, create confusion over who is responsible, and hope that voters blame Canberra instead of Spring Street. It is cynical, it is transparent, and it is failing. What is also failing is the broader principle that disaster recovery should be above politics. Australians have always accepted that when a fire, flood, or cyclone hits, governments will work together to get money out fast. That was the social contract. You lose your home, the government helps you rebuild. You lose your business, there is a support package. It might not be perfect, it might not cover everything, but it is supposed to be there. And when that system breaks down, not because of complexity or resource constraints, but because of deliberate political gamesmanship, trust collapses. And trust in government disaster response is not something you can rebuild with a press release. Albanese knows this. That is why he went nuclear, because once the precedent is set that state governments can sit on federal disaster funds without consequences, every future disaster becomes a negotiation, every fire season becomes a political standoff, every flood turns into a blame game, and the people who pay the price are the ones living in caravans, the ones whose businesses have burned to the ground, the ones who cannot afford to wait another month for a grant that should have been approved 6 weeks ago. And there's a broader economic consequence here that is not getting nearly enough attention. But it also raises a bigger question. If the current federal-state disaster funding model is this vulnerable to political manipulation, does it need to be scrapped entirely? Should disaster recovery be federalised? Should Canberra bypass the states and send money directly to councils or affected individuals? There are arguments on both sides. Federalising disaster response would eliminate the blame shifting and the bottlenecks, but it would also strip states of flexibility and local decision-making power. And in a country as big and diverse as Australia, that flexibility matters. The answer is probably not full federalisation, but it is definitely stronger accountability mechanisms, faster payment timelines, and automatic penalties for states that sit on federal funds past a certain deadline. Because right now, the only consequence for holding disaster money hostage is bad press, and clearly that is not enough. What Victorian fire victims need right now is not another announcement, not another joint press conference, not another promise that help is on the way. They need the $19.5 million that is already allocated, already approved, and already sitting in state government accounts. They need it in their hands today, because every day it sits there is another day a family cannot start rebuilding, another day a business stays shut, another day the recovery is delayed, and every one of those days is a choice. Jacinta Allan's government is choosing politics over people, and Albanese is right to be